Mount Everest, the world's highest peak above sea level. It's iconic and stands against the sky like a giant. Everest is covered in snow and ice and dead bodies. It's famous for its death zone, which has extremely thin air, making breathing difficult, requiring supplemental oxygen for climbers. This beautiful mountain is dotted with many climbers who never made their way down. Welcome to Morbid Outdoors, the podcast that ventures deep into the shadows of the wild. Here, we unravel the mysteries of missing persons, explore spine chilling legends, and share the most morbid stories that nature has to offer. From the depths of the dense forests to the highest mountain peaks, we'll uncover the secrets that lie hidden in the great outdoors. Join us as we navigate the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying. So if you dare, grab your gear and let's embark on a journey into the unknown. This is Morbid Outdoors. Hello, everyone. My name is Elise, and I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I have a special shout out for a new Patreon subscriber. Shout out to Mary Ellen. Thanks so much for becoming a member. We are going to discuss the bodies of Everest. Some have been removed and some have not been removed. And let me tell you, Mount Everest is probably one of the most morbid places outdoors that we will discuss on this show. I was doing the research for it, reading articles, and it is so gruesome, really, that all of these people, hundreds of people, are left up there after they die. And we'll talk about why. And I'm sure a lot of you know why, but I want to go over it again. We acknowledge that Mount Everest stands on lands that have been home to indigenous Himalayan peoples. This includes the Sherpa, Tamang, Ray, and Tibetan communities who have lived, traveled, and practiced spiritual traditions in these mountains for generations. For these cultures, Everest is not simply a peak to be climbed, but a sacred presence, a living landscape woven into language, religion, and identity. We honor their deep connection to this mountain, recognize their essential role in its history and stewardship, and acknowledge their continued presence in the region today. Okay, so I could not find many negative reviews on Everest on Google because it's not really its own Google thing, like place, even though it is a real place. So I actually did some digging and I found that Outside Online had some on Instagram. So these are reviews from All Trails. Someone said, overrated AF. Someone else said, way too much snow. Don't even get me started on the hills. Another person said, I did just fine in Crocs, and the trail really ought to be rated as moderate to easy. Someone else said, no one monitors these comments. Pretty moronic and juvenile. Be adults. And then another person commented, previous climbs at high altitudes would be necessary. Even though it's hard to think in the death zone, prospective climbers nonetheless need to know your limits because two people died on my summit day. And then there was one other one, and someone commented, or they reviewed it. I didn't complete or do this trail. I just want to say, grow up in all caps. All these reviews are fake. I can name so many people who have died on this expedition. Not one of you hooligans has hiked Mount Everest. You all need to grow up. There are no restaurants on the mountains. Without Sherpas and proper gear, you will likely die. This is the tallest mountain in the world. And this man used a lot of exclamation marks. So obviously some of those reviews, and there are lots, are funny ones where people are just making fun of others that rate national parks or mountains, and say like, we need to have more Walmarts here, whatever. You guys know the drill. And that guy was very offended. So, Jason, sorry, but you're panties were kind of in a twist. People are just having fun here. So let's talk about Mount Everest. So locally, it's known as Sagarmatha. I hope I'm saying that right in Nepal, and then there's another name in Tibet. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it because I don't know how to. And Mount Everest is the Earth's highest mountain above sea level. It lies in the Himalayan range and it actually marks part of the China Nepal border at its summit. Its height was most recently measured in 2020 by Chinese and Nepali authorities at 8,848.86 meters or 29,031 feet above sea level. Its name in these other languages means goddess in the sky, goddess of the sky. So, the summit of Everest is the point at which Earth's surface reaches the greatest distance above sea level. Several other mountains are sometimes claimed to be the tallest mountains on Earth. Mauna Kea in Hawaii is tallest when measured from its base, which is underneath the sea, and it rises over 33,464.6 feet or 10,200 meters from its base on the mid ocean floor, but only attains about 13,796 feet above sea level. Now, by the same measure of base to summit, Denali, or also known as Mount McKinley in Alaska, is taller than Everest as well. Despite its height above sea level only being 6,190 meters or 20,308 feet, Denali sits atop a sloping plain with elevations from 300 to 900 meters or 980 feet to 2,950 feet. So basically, I guess it all depends on what you want to define as the measurements. Both Mauna Kea is taller and Denali is taller than Everest if you're measuring from base to summit. Now that's why I threw that in there. Mount Everest is the highest mountain above sea level. So that is why I threw that in there. I really don't care what you think because I don't even really care what I think. I just wanted to give some figures because it doesn't really matter to me. But I just wanted to throw that in there that there are a couple other mountains that are actually taller from base to summit than Mount Everest. Obviously, as we all know, Mount Everest attracts many climbers, including highly experienced mountaineers. This is not hiking at all. This is mountain climbing and mountaineering. It is way different than hiking. There are two main climbing routes, one approaching the summit from the southeast in Nepal, which is known as the standard route, and the other one from the north in Tibet. Now, there are a lot of interesting things online about who first summited Everest. The first recorded efforts to reach this mountain summit were made by British mountaineers. As Nepal did not allow foreigners to enter the country at the time, the British made several attempts on the North Ridge route from the Tibetan side. On the 1924 expedition, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine made a final summit attempt on June 8th, but they never returned, leading to debate as to whether they were the first to reach the top. Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary made the first documented ascent of Everest in 1953 using the south, southeast ridge route. Norgay had reached 28,199 feet the previous year as a member of the 1952 Swiss expedition. The Chinese mountaineering team of Fuzhou, Gung Po, and Ku Yinhu made the first reported ascent of the peak from the North Ridge on May 25th, 1960. So basically, two men set out to climb it in 1924 and they never came back. So no one really knows if they made it to the summit and perished on the way down, or if they never made it to the summit at all, which is why Hillary and Norgay are the first ones that are said to have actually documented their summit of Mount Everest. While not posing substantial technical climbing challenges on the standard route, Everest presents dangers such as altitude sickness, weather, and wind, as well as hazards from avalanches and ice fall. As of May 2024, 340 people have died on Everest. Over 200 bodies remain on the mountain and have not been removed due to dangerous conditions. I think we all know this, but basically, because of the elevation and the weather patterns, there are very little native flora or fauna on Everest. A type of moss grows at 21,260 feet or 6,480 meters on Everest, and it may be the highest altitude plant species ever found. There's also an alpine cushion plant called Arenaria is known to grow at about 5,500 meters or 18,000 feet in this region. And according to a study based on satellite data from 1993 to 2018, vegetation is expanding in the Everest region. Researchers have found plants in areas that were previously deemed bare, and that's probably on global warming. Another fun fact is that a minute black jumping spider has been found at elevations as high as 6,700 meters or 22,000 feet, possibly making it the highest confirmed non microscopic permanent resident on Earth. So just think you're mountaineering, you're wheezing, you don't know if you're gonna die, and a fucking spider jumps on you. That would be like my worst nightmare. I just don't like spiders, okay? They're fast moving, they're small. Anyways, so a jumping spider might get you when you're on Everest. Because Everest is the highest mountain in the world, it obviously has attracted considerable attention and climbing attempts. Whether the mountain was climbed in ancient times is unknown. Like I said, it might have been successfully climbed in 1924, but this is not confirmed because the people climbing never made their way back down. Despite the effort poured into expeditions, only about 200 people had summited by 1987. Everest remained a difficult climb for decades, even by professional climbers and large national expeditions, which were the norm until the commercial era began in the 1990s. And as of December 2024, the Himalayan database recorded just under 13,000 total summits by around 7,200 different people. Okay, so June 8th, 1924, like I said earlier, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine made an attempt on the summit, and they never came back. And then on May 1st, 1999, the Mallory and Irvine research expedition found George's body on the north face in a snow basin below and to the west of the traditional site of Camp Number 6. So, because of the discovery of his body, this made the news everywhere. There was a lot of controversy, and basically, all of it was about and within the mountaineering community whether one or both of the men reached the summit 29 years before the first confirmed ascent and safe descent in 1953. Irvine's detached foot was still in a boot and sock, and it was actually just recently found in 2024, 100 years later. It's just crazy to me as I was reading this that, these two men went to do it in 1924. They never came back, and everybody knew that they had died up there, but nobody knew where they were at until 1999. Which is just I don't know, it's just insane that their bodies were up there for, like, I don't know, 70 or so years, and the research found expedition named after them actually found George Mallory's body. It's just crazy, and then to think that just 2 years ago one of the other Irvine's foot, which was in a sock and boot, was just found in 2024, literally 100 years later. So that just goes to show how things can be extremely well preserved on Everest because of the snow and ice. So now we're going to talk about more deaths on Everest, and this is not an exhaustive list. I do not have the time, brain power, or your time to go over, the 300 or so people that have died on this mountain. One of the notable things I found online was the 1996 disaster. On May 10th and 11th of 1996, 8 climbers died after guided expeditions were caught in a blizzard during a summit attempt on May 10th. During the 1990 season, 15 people in total died. These were the highest death tolls for a single weather event and season until the 16 deaths in the 2014 Mount Everest ice avalanche. 10 years later, in 2006, 12 people died in that climbing season. And then the 2010s were a time of new highs and lows for Everest, with disasters in both 2013 and 2014 causing record deaths. In 2015, there were no summits for the first time in decades, but a record was set in 2019 with over 890 summiters. On April 18th, 2014, an avalanche hit the area just below Base Camp 2. 16 people were killed, all Nepali guides, and 9 injured. In response, Sherpa climbing guides walked off the job, and most climbing companies pulled out in respect for the Sherpa people mourning their loss. The next year, 2015, was set to be a record breaking season of climbs because hundreds of permits had been issued. However, on April 25th, 2015, an earthquake measuring 7.8 triggered an avalanche that hit Everest Base Camp, shutting down the entire season. I remember this vividly because I'm from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Oops, sorry. And one of there was a guy that was, not from Hot Springs, but went to school there at the same school that my little sister graduated from. He actually was killed in this avalanche, and he was a Google executive and explorer. And so his name was Dan Friedenberg, and he was killed in this avalanche. So I remember this like it was yesterday because it made news, and it was like his alma mater where he went, and he went on and got this amazing job and was very smart, and he died in this earthquake, this avalanche on Everest, and so I remember that. That's not really what we're here to talk about today. 18 bodies were recovered by the Indian Army mountaineering team after this avalanche. Okay, so why we're really here today is to talk about the death zone. At the higher regions of Mount Everest, climbers seeking the summit typically spend a substantial amount of time within the death zone, which is altitudes higher than 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet. And they actually face significant challenges to survive while on this climb. Temperatures can dip to very low levels, resulting in frostbite of any body parts exposed to the air. Since temperatures are so low, snow is well frozen in certain areas, and death or injury by slipping and falling can and often does occur. There are also high winds at these altitudes on Everest, and they are another threat to climbers in the death zone. So, the major things that contribute to death on Everest are lack of oxygen, exhaustion, extreme cold, and climbing hazards. An injured person who cannot walk is in serious trouble because rescue by helicopter is really non existent after a certain feet in elevation. Now, carrying a person off the mountain is also very risky for obvious reasons. People who die during their climb are typically left behind. As of 2015, there are over 200 bodies that remain on this mountain. An interesting fact that I found is that there was a 2008 study done, and it noted that the death zone is indeed where most Everest deaths occur. But this study also noted that the most deaths occurred during descent from the summit. So most people can make it up and they ascend and they bag the peak, but on their way back down is when a lot of the deaths occur. A 2014 article in The Atlantic about deaths on Everest noted that while falling is one of the greatest dangers the death zone presents for all mountaineers, avalanches are a more common cause of death at lower altitudes. And obviously, because of gravity. So, more than 300 people are known to have died while climbing Everest, according to the Himalayan database. The overall death rate, which is the number of fatalities and they get that number by dividing the number of people on the mountain, not just those who summit, is approximately 1.2%, meaning that if you try to climb Everest, you have about a 1 in 100 chance of dying along the way, which is pretty high. But some people would be like, no, it's not high. It just depends on how you look at it, I guess. A lot of people that don't understand the outdoors, they often wonder why bodies are left on Mount Everest. And it really comes down to, three things. It's basically highly inefficient, impractical, and dangerous. And then there's the cost. It is also very expensive. Helicopters cannot be used over 21,000 feet. And most of the people that die are within the death zone at 26,000 feet. So, helicopter, going in and getting these people out is not viable. It's also extremely dangerous because you would have to physically have people go and retrieve these bodies, and that puts their lives at danger too. In fact, many people have died while trying to recover bodies on Everest. So, for the most part, it's safest not to. And finally, the cost associated with body recovery missions can be prohibitive because it's expensive to climb Everest. I saw a number that was like if you want to climb you enjoying a climbing expedition, it's like 40,000 to $100,000 just to climb. And if you die, that is a very expensive funeral, you just paid for your own funeral basically. But to retrieve these bodies is so expensive. So, so, so expensive. So while some bodies have been identified and relocated for various reasons, the majority of fallen climbers remain on the mountain where they died. So let's talk about just a few of the bodies that are on Everest. The first two I want to talk about are George Mallory and Sandy or Andrew Irvine. I've seen different names, and Sandy might have been his nickname. I have no idea. So George Mallory was a British mountaineer, and he's one of the most enigmatic figures in the history of Everest exploration. He disappeared in 1924 while trying to ascend Everest, and the exact circumstances of his death and Andrew's death remain uncertain, but evidence suggests that they suffered fatal falls. Mallory's body was found on the north face of Everest. It showed signs of numerous injuries, including a severe rope jerk injury around his waist, suggesting he had been tied to Irvine when he fell. The discovery of George's body also revealed that he had severe head wounds, which likely contributed to his death. Mallory's body was found lying on a remote part of the mountain and dressed in early 20th century mountaineering gear. His body is believed to have been removed from Everest by the Chinese government. Andrew's foot, sock, and boot were found in September 2024 by filmmaker Jimmy Chin while leading a National Geographic team on the North Col of Everest. These remains were turned over to the China Tibet Mountaineering Association and the governmental authority that this is who oversees the north side of Everest, basically. Mallory and Irvine were known to have carried a camera. However, the camera has never been found. Additionally, Mallory promised to place a photograph of his wife on the summit. That photo was not found either, fueling the ongoing speculation about whether or not if they reached the top. So, George Mallory's body was found, and Andrew's body hasn't been, except for his foot, boot, and sock. The most famous body probably is someone that is called Green Boots, and this is believed to be Tsewang Palhor. I hope I'm saying that right. Paljor. He lost his life during the ill-fated 1996 Everest expedition involving the Indo-Tibetan Border Police team from India. The name Green Boots refers to the green mountaineering boots that are on his feet. He and his six-person team were caught in a blizzard just short of the summit. While three of the members turned around, Green Boots and two others decided to continue to the summit. They never made it back. Green Boots became a landmark on the main Northeast Ridge route until his body was eventually moved to a more discreet location in 2014. Another famous figure is Frances Arsentive, also known as Sleeping Beauty. She lost her life on Everest while attempting to summit in May 1998. She and her husband, Sergei Arsentiv, embarked on their Everest summit attempt with the goal of reaching the top without supplemental oxygen, which is really not done. The pair successfully reached the summit, but as I said before, on their descent, they encountered major difficulties. During their descent, Frances became separated from Sergei. She was weak from exhaustion, cold, and the effects of altitude sickness. There was a team up there from Uzbekistan, and they treated her with oxygen and carried her down about 800 feet or 244 meters below the summit when they themselves became too tired to continue the effort. The next morning, Frances was found still alive but in critical condition by other climbers, including Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd. Her last words were, "Don't leave me." And it's just so sad to think about. It's just so sad that those were her last words. Sergei, her husband, also lost his life during a desperate attempt to find and save his wife. His body was discovered during the 1999's Mallory and Irvine research expedition. Frances became known as Sleeping Beauty of Everest due to her appearance. She was laid on the mountain as if she were sleeping, and her skin was white and waxy due to the cold. Her body was eventually recovered 9 years later in 2007. Our next body is Scott Fisher. Scott was an experienced American mountaineer and mountain guide who lost his life during the infamous 1996 Everest disaster. His death is one of the most notable in the history of Everest expeditions. Fisher died on May 11th, 1996, during a descent from the summit of Mount Everest. He was the leader of the Mountain Madness expedition, one of several groups attempting to summit on the same day. Scott reached the summit late in the afternoon but became seriously ill on the descent, suffering from symptoms consistent with high altitude cerebral edema or HACE. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and despite the efforts of a lot of fellow climbers and Sherpas to help him, he was unable to descend under his own power. The severe storm that struck the mountain that evening compounded with the difficulties of rescuing him. Fisher was last seen alive near the south summit, where he eventually succumbed to his condition. Following his death, Scott's body remained on Everest. For years, his body was visible to climbers ascending the southeast ridge route. This exact location of Scott's body may have changed due to shifting snow and ice on the mountain, but he is still up there. 10 years after Scott, David Sharp, who was a British mountaineer, he met his tragic end during his solo attempt to summit Everest in 2006. He was also climbing without the support of a commercial expedition, and he was attempting to reach the summit using the North Col route. On his descent, he took refuge in a cave known as Green Boots Cave, named after the body of the other climber that we mentioned who died in the same location. David succumbed to what is believed to be a combination of hypothermia, altitude sickness, and possibly oxygen deprivation. Reports suggest, this is this crazy part, that over 40 climbers passed him on the night of his death, with some mistaking him for a frozen body rather than a living person in distress. There was a lot of criticism, and it was all of the criticism was directed at the climbers and expeditions that saw him but did not try to help him. And this raised questions about the moral obligations of climbers to help those who are in distress. Sharp's body was eventually moved from its original location, and it's now been placed out of sight. Hannelore Schmatz was the fourth woman to reach the summit of Everest, but she was the first woman to die on the mountain. Her Everest expedition in 1979 became one of the most talked about stories in the history of climbing due to its tragic outcome. In the autumn of 1979, Hannelore, alongside her husband Gerhard Schmatz, joined an expedition. Gerhard was the expedition leader, and at 50, he was aiming to become one of the oldest climbers to summit Everest at that time. Hannelore was experienced, having climbed several high peaks, and was determined to make her mark on Everest. She reached the summit of Everest late in the day, which left her and her companions with little time to descend before darkness and the extreme cold of night. And on their descent, just below the summit, she and another climber, American Ray Jeanette, they decided that they were too tired to continue. Despite the efforts of their Sherpa guides to convince them to keep moving, she and her companion stayed put. The decision proved fatal as they were exposed to the harsh elements at high altitude and without the adequate protection. Both Hannelore and Jeanette died. Their Sherpa guide survived. For many years, her body laid on Everest as a landmark just 328 feet or 100 meters above Camp 4. She rested in a seated position, leaning against her backpack, with open eyes and blowing hair. Eventually, her body disappeared from the mountain, moved by natural forces. Our next person is Rob Hall. Rob was a distinguished New Zealand mountaineer and founder of Adventure Consultants. He was a central figure in one of the most harrowing tragedies on Everest, which happened in 1996. Now, Rob had already successfully guided numerous clients to the summit of Everest in previous years, and he was embarking on what was to be his final climb with a group that included both seasoned and less experienced climbers. Unfortunately, their ascent was hampered by delays. Rob did successfully summit, but as the day wore on, conditions on the mountain deteriorated. There was a sudden snowstorm that subjected all of these climbers to blinding snow, strong winds, and freezing temperatures. Rob and his client Doug Hansen became stranded just below the summit, caught in the storm's ferocity and dwindling oxygen supplies. Rob was determined to stay with his client who was too ill to move. Both climbers eventually succumbed to the elements. Rob's final moments were marked by a heartbreaking satellite phone conversation with his wife, who was in New Zealand. Despite knowing his death was imminent, he calmly said to his wife, "Sleep well, my sweetheart. Please don't worry too much." Rob's body remains on Mount Everest, located where he died near the south summit. His wife, Jan Arnold, believed that Rob's body lies where he would have liked to stayed, and she doesn't want people to endanger themselves in an attempt to recover his body. She has asked that his body be left alone. And the last person we're going to talk about today is Shreya Shah Chlorfine, who was a Nepali born Canadian mountaineer. Her dream was to climb Everest, and unfortunately, that dream ended in tragedy. The 2012 Everest season was noted for its crowded conditions, with a high number of climbers attempting to summit during the narrow window of favorable weather. She was very inexperienced and slow, which ultimately led to her demise. Now, Shreya, she actually successfully reached the summit late in the day, but became exhausted and ran out of supplemental oxygen. She died on May 19th, 2012, during her descent on the mountain's south side near the balcony area. A team of Sherpas successfully retrieved her body. Mount Everest is often described as the ultimate achievement, the highest point on Earth, the roof of the world. But scattered along its slopes are reminders of the cost that pursuit can carry. The bodies that remained on Everest are not curiosities or landmarks. They are climbers who made real choices, faced impossible conditions, and did not come home. At that altitude, recovery is often more dangerous than leaving someone where they fell. Thin air, extreme cold, and constant risk mean that survival must come before ceremony. What remains on the mountain is not neglect, it's the reality of a place that does not bend to human intention. For the Sherpa communities and locals who live in Everest's shadow, the mountain is not a challenge to conquer, but a sacred presence, one that demands respect, humility, and restraint. Every body on the route is a reminder that Everest doesn't measure success by summits, records, or photos. It measures by survival. In the end, the mountain keeps what it chooses, and perhaps the truest lesson Everest offers is this: no view, no goal, and no summit is worth forgetting that human lives that pave the way, or the limits that nature has always set. As always, recreate responsibly and remember, sometimes the great outdoors aren't always great. Thanks for listening to Morbid Outdoors. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. It's free, easy, and it helps us out immensely. When you subscribe, you get updates on our latest episodes, and it also boosts our visibility. making it easier for other curious souls to find us. Another great way to support Morbid Outdoors is by leaving us a review. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, a quick review helps us know what you love about the show. You can also join us on Patreon for early and ad free content. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Morbid Outdoors Podcast. You can email us case suggestions and your campfire stories at morbidoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for the support, and I'll see you next time.